All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I think we'll make a start. The gentleman on my right has reminded me that that clock's a little bit slow, but by his computer it is 6:30. So, welcome. Let me do the necessaries first of all. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exits are located at the rear of this room. Go down the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. Just to remind you that this meeting is being webcast as well. And if you do have a mobile phone with you, could you please make sure it's either turned off or turned on to silent. Thank you. I just want to make a couple of opening remarks before we get onto the main agenda. First of all, apologies that it has been so long since the last meeting of the Standards Committee, and belated thanks to those of you who were there last time for voting me as chair in absentia. You may remember I was on leave myself. One other small thing I'd like to say is congratulations to Melanie, because during this period of time, this 6 months, she has been appointed as Legal Services Manager by open competition. It wasn't a straightforward promotion, but she went through an open competition process. So congratulations for that. Well done. Good. I just want to say a word or two about the Standards Committee for, as a reminder for everybody, but maybe perhaps for the newer members. There is no other committee like it in Basingstoke and Deane Borough Council. It's a mixture, as you can see, of borough councillors, parish councillors and independent members. It's chaired by an independent member, as you see, but only borough councillors have voting rights. I'll say that again, only borough councillors have voting rights. So thus the importance of item 4 on the agenda, which is about the appointment of a vice chair, because if there is a necessity for a vote, then I vacate the chair, the vice chair takes over, and the borough councillors who are present then vote on that particular motion, on that particular item. The other thing, I'm sure you know this, but I'm going to say it anyway, that is that it's important for all councillors to leave their party labels at the door on this committee, on the Standards Committee, because what we're interested in is your integrity, your honesty, your analytical skill, impartiality, problem-solving ability, and your contribution to policy development and practice. And it's those things of themselves that make a great contribution to the work of the Standards Committee. And on that last point about contribution to policy development and practice, you will see from tonight's agenda that there are 2 items, items 7 and 8, where some of those thoughts will come into play, which is the media protocol and the need to set up a working party to review the arrangements for dealing with complaints. That's all I wish to say. Just one other thing. At the end of the formal business, the webcast will cease and there will be a training session which will be led by Melanie. Okay, so let's move on then to the formal agenda. First of all, we have apologies for absence from Councillor Slimin and Councillor Dan Putty. Declarations of interest, can I call for? None, thank you very much. Urgent matters, have we been notified of any? Nope. Appointment of Vice Chairman. As I say, this is an important item. It's been held over since the initial committee of Standards Committee back in July, and it is for the borough councillors amongst themselves to determine who will be the vice chair of this particular committee. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to discuss this amongst yourselves. If not, we'll take a short recess so that you can sort something out.
If I may, Chair, we haven't had a huddle, formal or informal, but if I can report to you that towards the end of last year, I think it might have been prior to his departing on holiday, Councillor Putty approached me and mentioned that he indicated an interest in being appointed as Vice Chair. He was sounding me out, and I said that I had no opposition to that objection. And I think he may have mentioned this to my colleague, Councillor Tomlin. But he hasn't made any. I then assumed there may well have been from the Chair a request from Councillor Putty, and we would have voted on that. But I don't have any formal proposal. I don't know exactly now then how we progress, Chair. I take your advice.
Thanks for that. Could I just ask the other borough councillors just to respond to that particular, let's call it a proposal for now, see if you have any objection or any other ideas.
Well, it's indeed true. I do believe or recollect a conversation with Councillor Putty about maybe the word Vice Chairman eluded me, but I understand the context of the committee, so I believe he was talking about Chairman, Vice Chairman, sorry. So I certainly would be sympathetic with that, but of course we don't actually know because he hasn't said anything to anybody.
I'm exactly the same. I have no problem with him standing if that's what he wishes, but I've not actually spoken to him personally on the matter at all.
Thank you. Councillor Putty does, of course, have a background of service on the Standards Committee, which I consider as an advantage. So if I propose from the Chair that he be elected as Vice Chairman, could I ask the three of you to respond to that? I think that would be the sensible way forward. Are you happy with that? Well, it's interesting that he had mentioned it to two of the borough councillors who are present. And I have had an informal word with him, but he seems always to have been on holidays over the last few months. I think it's recovering from the mayorship over the previous year. But if you're happy, then I would propose Councillor Putty as Vice Chair. And if you are content with that, perhaps you could indicate. Sorry? Yes?
Do you require a seconder for that? I would second that.
Is that agreed? It seems to be the way to get in office on this committee, you know, to be on leave, and then you get elected either to the chairmanship or to the vice chair. Thank you very much. I think that is an important appointment. The next item of business is the minutes of the committee meeting held on the 24th of July, which is paper A in your pack. For those of you who were there, are you happy with those, or do you have any points to make? All agreed. Thank you very much. Paper B is in your pack for information. This is two updated decision notices. One relates to an appeal, and the other relates to a complaint which was made against the parish councillor, I believe. Is there anything you wish to add personally? Just for noting. But I see Mr. Moore wants to make a point. Yes.
Thank you, Chairman. Paper B, page 1, in the absence of Appendix 1, can I put my hand up and say I was the independent member and not Chris Evans, who actually took the decision? I've already expressed my views in private as to what I think of the outcome, and I'm not going to make any public comments on this, other than to say that I don't think any lessons have been learned from this, but there are important issues to be addressed, I think, by the working party, which we propose to set up, on the handling of appeals. This was the first appeal I think we had. And going through it, looking at the process, I have got some thoughts, which if, and this is the best picture I'll have all evening, if I get on the working party, I'll be very happy to bring forward. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Okay, both points noted. On your first one, Melanie's just told me it's on the web, the appendix, but obviously not in the paper that we have before us this evening. Okay. All right, moving on.
Could I ask a question in relation to the sort of protocol in regards to the information that's provided on the agenda, Chair?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Being new to this. Yeah. I appreciate that the decision is entered onto the website. Is the whole of the detail that we receive here in these papers, is that also available on the website?
Yes, I think it is. And indeed, as I said to Mr. Moore just now, there's more on the website than we have here.
Thank you, Chair. It's actually just a question on, it's page 4 of the second decision on paper B. There's a comment about the particular issue, comment made by the person on the in question, but it says, given that this is a post on Facebook, I just wondered, you talked about maybe having some guidance later on that. It's the use of Facebook. I read that, well, it doesn't really matter what was said because it was Facebook. So that's where I'm a little confused with what was said. Thank you.
I certainly don't think you should take away from this evening's meeting that as a councillor you can post whatever you like on Facebook and it'll be fine. That particular case was a finely balanced case, and the code of conduct only applies when you're acting in your capacity as a member. In that particular case, the individual had posted it on that website in their own individual name, not as a councillor, and they'd made other posts in their own individual name. So he wasn't on that website saying to people, I'm councillor such and this is what I've got to say. For that and a number of other reasons, he couldn't be regarded as acting as a member because of the Livingstone case. And what that says is that for every situation you have to look at all the facts and determine whether he was acting as a member. So it isn't saying that if you post on Facebook that's fine. What it's saying is if you post on Facebook in your personal capacity, you will not be covered by the code of conduct. But if you post on Facebook as a member, then you will be covered by the code of conduct.
All right, thank you. Let's move on then to item 7 on the agenda, which is media protocol. This will be presented initially by Sarah Shepherd on my far left, and Melanie would, I think, be chipping in from time to time. This is not a totally new departure. We have had media protocols previously in previous incarnations of the Standards Committee, and this, as I read it, is in order to reflect the current situation as we have it. But Sarah, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, that's entirely right. I'm the manager of the communications team here at the Borough Council, and we act as the press office for the council. So that means we take media inquiries reactively. So they approach us and ask us questions, and we give them a statement or a response in return. And we obviously proactively as well release information generally to the media. We've had a number of media calls, as you won't be surprised to hear, over the years on investigations and outcomes of investigations and hearings about investigations. Sometimes the person complaining will go to the media. In one particular case, even before they come and make the complaint, they went to the media and said they were going to complain. We've had other councillors that have tipped off, have known of the particular situation and have tipped off the media about another councillor being the subject of a complaint. And in one case so far, I think the only one we know of was a councillor themselves that was the subject of a complaint, went to the media, almost to try and put their side of the story before it went before standards. That was the aim of the original media protocol. was to set out a balance between transparency and the clarity about what happens in the process, and obviously the reputation of the councillors involved before a decision's been made. So it tries to balance the two of those. The key idea of having a protocol is that we act fairly in every case because we follow these guidelines. Now, the thing that isn't fair, I suppose, from the perspective of the councillors involved, is that we do it reactively. So we wouldn't approach the media at any point in the process other than when a public notice has been put onto the website, and that is when that becomes public. But even at that point, we wouldn't approach the media with it. We would be there reactively all the way through. And that's why this takes you through each stage of the process, from the point of a complaint being made through to a decision notice being published, and considers what we would say in each case and what we would reveal and what we wouldn't. And as I say, that the point of this is to give a fair and consistent process for the way that we do that. This is a revision of the protocol, as the Chairman said, under the previous standards processes, and that in itself was based on a toolkit that was developed by the Standards Board for England. So we were following the principles of that. Basically, the principles on disclosing information are broadly similar to that. It updates the procedure to match your existing arrangements, and it also takes into account the difference in the communications environment. Previously, at the very beginning of the process, it was seen that the public notice would be placed at reception, and as a public notice in the newspaper. That's now been overtaken by it's placed on the website, and that's the main method of dissemination. So it reflects that as well. If I just take you through briefly and quickly the appendix, just to clarify a couple of points. On page 2, it's been pointed out to me that it's a little confusing at the very beginning where it says pages refer to. That's the page numbers refer to the particular information as to what we would say at that stage later on. But this flowchart aims to sort of clarify the steps of the process. The point that we've missed out between the investigation and the next steps of the process are that we would add the box consult independent person. So that needs to be added into that stage. As the Chairman pointed out, was a useful addition. It takes you through what we do on receiving a complaint. At this point, we aim to ensure that the... I'm happy, if it makes more sense, if you want to comment as each point comes up. Yeah.
It comes later on as well, but in the flow chart, at the bottom right-hand Deputy Monitoring Officer decision, no breach, going to the Standard Subcommittee hearing. I didn't think there was one there.
There is. It's Appendix 1 to the arrangements. I don't have authority as Deputy Monitoring Officer to determine sanction or determine final conclusions on breach. So within the current arrangements that we've got, there's still provision in there for a standard subcommittee, and it is based upon what we used to have previously.
I did point that out. I've just noticed that there's a missing arrow as well between that standard subcommittee down to decision notice, because that would be published. Just to clarify, the two sides of this are the two different processes. So the left-hand side is if it's a councillor versus councillor, yep, and the right hand is if it's another person against a councillor. Yep. So coming back to page 3, this takes you through the information that we would give if we were approached. This would be reactively with a media inquiry. As I already indicated, that can come from a number of sources that might have informed the media. But the reason we don't give the name of the person making the complaint at this stage is that potentially that could be disruptive to the process, because the media might then approach them directly, and obviously they may not be the person that prompted the inquiry. That's the reason why we don't name them at this stage. We just say whether they're a councillor, whether they're a member of the public or other. Although you'll see at the bottom of the page that at the point of the decision notice, the person making the complaint is named, unless the extenuating circumstances at that point. That would be something you would consider, wouldn't it?
Basically, as you know, with standards, the whole idea is that we're open and transparent as you can be when you've got a live investigation. So our view, our starting point is that everything will become open at decision notice stage, so everybody's names, full details of the complaint, unless there's exceptional reason why it should remain confidential, and it's the monitoring officer in consultation, I believe, with an independent person who makes that judgment call.
Then going over the page onto page 4, obviously if the complaint identifies criminal conduct or possible criminal conduct, that would be the point at which we would defer any media comment to the police or other regulatory authority to which that was referred. Obviously we would inform them if we had an inquiry, and we would work together with them and they would make the response. The point of informal settlement we go through then, obviously that would be only commented on at the point at which the informal settlement had been reached and a decision notice had been published. We wouldn't at any point during the process say we were trying to consider that, because that might again prejudice the outcome and might be contrary to what happens in the end. So during an investigation, that takes us through that we simply confirm that an investigation is going on and give generic information. There are some sort of points at the end of this document that give sort of suggested answers to questions when we're asked by the press, you know, what's an independent member, what's an independent person, who investigates a complaint, and that kind of information might be what we would release at this point, just the very simple generic information. It has been suggested we might bring that to the beginning because it might actually make the document flow better in terms of explaining some of those things up front, so I think that would probably help. Then we go through to when an investigation is finished, and obviously at that point it depends which route it takes, and then the final decision notice, and that is the point at which it becomes public, and obviously we would direct the press to that. If the press wanted that, we may put that in a quote from, or some parts of that in a quote from the chairman of the committee at that point, but that would be the point at which we would release the information, no earlier.
I'm referring to the page 4 of the 7, and it's the heading informal settlement. And I was, have to say, struggled a little in regard to identifying which particular aspect of hearing, or whether from the chart, whether we were talking about complaint by deputy monitoring officer, that's in brackets deputy monitoring officer, or the monitoring officer. But I want to ask particularly where it reads after a decision has been made and forwarded to the appropriate parties, the decision notice will be made by, unless the monitoring officer in consultation with the independent person determines that it should remain confidential. Whereas on page 6 of 7, it also mentions the monitoring officer consults with the parish representative, if relevant. And is that not appropriate on this particular?
That's right to point that out. You are correct. It should also refer to parish representative where appropriate under the informal settlement paragraph. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Again, on that particular aspect, I have a query as to whether this is felt to be appropriate in terms of how we go forward in regard to applying standards. Is effectively then this possibly undermines the process because it reverts back. All the information has been investigated and the evidence has been gathered. Then it reverts back to a decision then to be made by potentially 3 persons. Under what criteria? There's no, I mean, I appreciate possibly that would have to be a very long list, but I'm wondering whether at some stage we should be identifying what might be the particular exceptional circumstances. There's no indication given what they may be.
The next item on the agenda looks at a review of the arrangements, and I think that's certainly something that working party can pick up as part of that review. I think you're right. I think it could be clarified. I think the starting point is always that it will be open. In determining what is confidential at the moment, what we would look at is the exempt information categories under the Local Government Act that we currently apply to all committee procedures, and also the definition of the common law definition of confidential information, which is unlikely to apply in anything that we're dealing with. But I do agree, I think as part of the working party, that's perhaps something we should pick up and look into trying to define that more.
Okay, sorry, I think that is the conclusion of the walkthrough, as it were, of the paper. So I'll invite other questions now. Councillor Fryer.
I'm still, which might come out into the review, but I'm looking at page 5 of 7, and it's the last paragraph when an investigation is finished, and the beginning of the second bit. I thought that the object of the exercise, I mean, I agree that this was relevant in the previous standards committee, but I thought the end of the day was that it was to a degree an informal situation whereby either the independent lay member or the independent member, together with the monitor officers, decided whether a breach and what sanctions were going to be given, rather than going down to, which implies a full hearing here.
There's two routes here. So you've got where an independent member makes the decision, they can determine breach and they can determine sanction, and that's to try and make sure that this process isn't used as a political tool and that those matters were dealt with more promptly. Where it's deputy monitoring officer, they do have to go to a subcommittee if the deputy monitoring officer determines it as a breach. So there's a slightly different process in terms of the two.
Just referring back then to the two cases which are included in the pack, one in regard to, perhaps not, because it was a no breach, wasn't it, in the case of the parish councillor. So probably my question would be irrelevant at that stage, but supposing that had been a breach and not a no action, are you saying that we would have a PUCA Standards Committee subcommittee adjudicating on the whether it was what sanctions were going to be given?
Yeah, if that had been a breach, what would happen is it would be referred to a standards subcommittee, and I believe the hearing has to be held within 3 months of the initial referral from the Deputy Monitoring Officer. That standards subcommittee wouldn't just be determining sanction, they'd be reviewing the monitoring officer's report and determining breach, and they could go against the monitoring officer and say, actually, this isn't a breach at all, Deputy Monitoring Officer, you've got it wrong here. So they'll be looking at the case afresh to determine whether there's breach or no breach, and if there is breach, they'll be looking at the sanctions. As I said, that is in the procedures that we've got in the moment. I believe I am right, it's Appendix 1 of the procedure arrangements that we've got in place at the moment.
Having protocol, presumably the press will be given copies of this, will they? The press will see copies of the protocol, will they? Or the media?
Yes, we usually, I mean, at the point at which they make a media inquiry around it, we make it clear that we would follow the protocol for media inquiries through the process, and then obviously it will be available on the website to them anyway.
I asked that because wasn't sure about the identification of the independent person or the independent member. Obviously, the monitoring officer is known as a statutory officer of the council. But I presume that the response will be we would not identify the independent member, independent person at a particular point, but maybe later on, I don't know, but it isn't covered as part of that, a part of the protocol for your staff. And well, if they're asked the question of who is the independent member or independent person involved in this matter, would you give that out straight away, or not at all, or at the end of the hearing?
You've got us, Chris. we haven't covered that in the protocol that's before you at the moment. That isn't covered, so at the moment it's not specific. My view, and I'm open to comment on this view, would be that you would disclose the name of the independent person or independent member who's determined that complaint, just as the deputy monitoring officer who's determined that complaint would be known. But that's a matter perhaps for discussion at this evening's meeting.
But when would you? I don't have a problem if I'm an independent member or whatever. Know that I'm involved in that sort of thing. But when would you be given that, or also making it quite clear that if the press approach that person who'd been named only at a certain point, would they be prepared to make any comment? And I think if you are on independent person or independent member, it must be quite clear that you should not make any comment, except maybe after the matter's over. But it just isn't covered. That's all.
I think you would make that information available as soon as the appointment is made. So I would imagine we've got this bit on receiving the complaint, which is dealt with on page 26 of 30 of your papers, 3 of 7 of the actual report. So I think obviously, generally the process is that as soon as you get a complaint in, you appoint an independent member, an independent person, the parish representative. So it's done quite proactively. So I would imagine we would release that information at that point. And I think the advice would be, as always the case on any standards matters, that if you were contacted, that it would be a no-comment response and refer them to Sarah Shepherd's communication team to deal with any media inquiries.
Yes, I agree. That's what we've all done up till now, but I think maybe if you are putting it in writing, then maybe it should be covered somewhere, even for people who come on the board the committee who are not experienced, and also that people, the media reading it, will know full well that don't waste your time looking for comment on the matter until it's been finalised.
Yeah, what I'd like to do is to obviously the recommendation before us is to approve the code of conduct, etc., etc. But I'd like to say something like approve the code of conduct as amended, and invite the proposed working party to also look at this protocol, the one that we're going to deal with on the next item on the agenda. That that this paper should also be remitted to that, so that all these very helpful points that you're making and any other inconsistencies that might exist between the protocol as currently drafted and a revised procedure as worked out, that they're in sync with one another. Yeah.
Chair, I think that's a really good idea to include this in the working party going forward. The only thing I would ask as an officer is that if we could perhaps look at approving the media protocol for the purposes this evening,
Yes.
so that between now and then we've got something in place, and then when we come back from the working party we can incorporate a new revised document following that. So we're happy to make the amendment as suggested by Chris Evans. If that's agreed by all members, we can make that amendment, and then hopefully, there might be other comments to be made, but hopefully going forward this evening we can have an approved policy which will then form part of the subject to review for the working party.
Yeah, that was my intention. I think not only the point that Chris has made, but when Sarah made her presentation, she said one or two other things had been incorporated. So that's why I was proposing to amend the recommendation at the end to say that we approve the code of conduct as amended. Okay, so the points that have been noted during the course of this meeting, and then to add on to that, that it should be referred to or remitted to the new working party. All right, would you be happy with that?
Yes, subject to continued discussion and questioning of the content of this report in front of us now. Yes, I do, Chair. If I might just start by saying I do appreciate that this is something that I'm new to in this particular detail. But the very heading, which is saying it's a media and communications protocol, I question why then on page 4 of 7, under suggested answers to specific media questions on investigations, the bold states who investigates a complaint, in other words, inferring that's the question, and then I suppose the first sentence is the lead to the answer. The monitoring officer has a statutory duty to ensure the investigation of any standards complaint complies with the Localism Act 2011. And then we've got a lot more about the role and the sort of duties. Is that required in a protocol? Is not the first sentence the answer?
In effect, Councillor Parker, we would pick and choose the parts of that that refer to the answer, if you see what I mean. When we're approached by the media, particularly when you're making no comment because you're not giving any additional information, sometimes they will then start asking questions about the process itself. Well, who makes the final decision and who investigates? And I wouldn't give a comment that long, but that gives me the background information to make the response, if you see what I mean. So it's a consistent crib sheet for my team to make those kind of responses. So if they were coming to us and saying, you know, in a standards complaint, who investigates the complaint, that gives us all the information we need to give that response. And that was why it was quite useful to have it in there before, when we've been approached with similar questions during the process of an investigation. That helps.
Well, yes, it does, and effectively infers that which I quite accept, that I'm not fully understanding then what we're trying to achieve in regard to this protocol. But because there are several things inside of that paragraph that I would actually query in terms of where we are saying that in the monitoring officer can also appoint an investigator, alternative investigator, or firm. And if this is, if we're sort of running with that sort of effectively not detailed, because that doesn't imply to anybody in terms of what type of firm. You know, it just merely says a firm. Could be anybody. I'm assuming it's a firm specialising in that type of business and probably regulated by a particular sort of authority. So I just think maybe this is something, not exactly what we're trying to achieve tonight, but I do have some concerns in relation to maybe, as I would say, the scope of the monitoring officer, and I can take that up someone else, Chair. Not for this evening, perhaps.
Okay, I've been asked to respond to that, so I'm more than happy to do so. I think that what that paragraph reflects is that the monitoring officer within the statute does have these powers. It doesn't mean because as monitoring officer that they have to personally carry out all the investigation themselves. Historically, there were a number of investigations that were outsourced to external firms. You're right to question the use of the word firm. There's a difference out there. Previously, we had a barrister who conducted an investigation on our behalf, but you also have individuals who do this freelance because it's quite a niche area. When we had the standards for England, there was a much bigger market for it. Now that the standards regime is lessened, there is less of a market out there of individuals providing that type of service. But it was really in the media protocol to stress to members of the public when these media inquiries were being made that it isn't necessarily the monitoring officer who's going to be investigating. It isn't necessarily the decision maker who will be the person who investigates. They can delegate aspects of that investigation to whoever they want to ensure that the job is done. And I'm happy to discuss the powers of the monitoring officer further, and I hope that to a degree clarifies some of the points that you've raised.
I was just going to respond to Councillor Parker's point, actually, around, I think perhaps my heading doesn't help. It's sort of one of the things that has come from the previous protocol that we had that was very led by the protocol under the standards board as it previously stood. And we've had media inquiries before which have specifically asked why the monitoring officer wasn't conducting the investigation themselves, and that's why that sort of was developed as an answer so that we could use that again in other answers, similar answers. I'm wondering if I changed it to information that can be used in response to specific questions, rather than suggesting that's the entire answer we would give. Would that help to clarify?
I was to a degree prompted by my colleague's question in relation to whether this was going to be entered onto the website. And if it is, as therefore it's there as an informative, and it doesn't, to my mind, read very well. If this was going to be entered onto the council website as a protocol, then if it is done as it appears now, verbatim, in the sense of the heading then would read suggested answers to specific media questions or investigations, and I think that's where it needs some attention, Chair, in terms of how it looks in regard to the sort of branding of the council, is all I'm really saying, and I'm sorry to have to raise that, but it was only by the fact that I wasn't understanding that this protocol itself was also going to be then put to the website. The headings, I think, need more thinking.
I think you're right. I think that we use it very much as an internal working document, but in the spirit of transparency, that if we're going to follow the same process fairly through everything, we ought to reveal that process. That in fact these elements might be more suited towards the internal working document as an appendix, and then cover the protocols. Some of those suggested answers would be just for internal working and based upon the particular case. So if it was being investigated by someone other than the monitoring officer, that would be the answer we'd give, but that would only be appropriate in that case. So we could separate that out, if that helps.
Yes, I was wondering as well if, as approved, it could be used as an internal document for the time being without putting it onto the website until such time as it has been considered by the review committee that we're also looking towards, because that can then bear in mind these points and make sure that it is got an outward face.
We will ensure that all the amendments that have been put forward this evening are incorporated into the amended version of the document. We do want this to be a live working document, yes. And we do, if the media make an inquiry, we do want to be able to say this is a copy of our media protocol that we're working to at the moment. So any amendments that have been proposed this evening and agreed, we will ensure that it is an amended version, which will mean that it can be a live working document.
I think that's fine, that it is the live working document, but I think the reservation is about putting it on the website at the moment in its current form, and that one would only do so once the review committee had had the opportunity to look at it. Councillor Parker?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm appreciative of Sarah's response, and the sort of thing the direction I'm moving in is that I see no purpose in having on page, if you're incorporating effectively the whole paragraph, the wording suggested answers to specific media questions on investigations. It doesn't need to be there. It just says who investigates a complaint. And that's all the protocol needs to be telling anybody in those terms. Not that that could be a suggested answer.
Chairman, I support that. A protocol is a formal document. A protocol should be saying that's what we will do, whatever. But certainly with attached to that in the office must be a list of questions you might be asked, and that's where they should be split out. But the actual protocol itself is a formal document and no other questions at all. And Councillor Parker's right, you don't have to have questions. The monitoring officer has a statutory duty to whatever. And that's a statement. That's in my view. That's what a protocol is about. That's what we're going to do. There's a statement. And if you ask any questions, well, we've got our own internal crib sheet to do everything. It's much easier also with internally. You haven't got to try worrying about writing something formal for every single situation beyond here. You've got your own internally written prompt sheet.
So if we were to remove that section, the 3 bullet points around the suggested answers, and leave that as a working document in my office in response to any, as a prompt sheet almost in response to the circumstances of what's approached to us, but the rest of it becomes the protocol. You're right, it doesn't fit naturally there as a published protocol, does it?
It has to be written as a formal document in a very sort of black and white and whatever. That's it. There's no questions at all. That's the situation. That, there you can understand this. You might understand the background to it. Then you ask us questions and do all that. But the actual protocol, if we're going to publish it, must be no more than that at all. I think anyway.
So is that agreed then, subject to the amendments that we've discussed? Yes. Okay. And as I suggested earlier, that we'll also invite the proposed working party to look at this in tandem with the new arrangements. Is that agreed? Thank you. Okay, but that takes us quite neatly then to the next item on the agenda, which is this proposal to establish a working party. Melanie, would you like to just give us a few reasons why it's necessary?
Yeah. I think this is quite an exciting opportunity for the Standards Committee. We currently have arrangements in place for dealing with complaints made against councillors. All of the people using those arrangements, I think, can see where, through experience and practice, things can be done in better ways. But I think what the opportunity will be for the working parties to come together and start with a blank sheet of paper, setting out our priorities. One of the key priorities for myself is to attempt to reduce the amount of time that it takes to deal with complaints. I'm pleased to say that compared to what it used to take, which was on average over a year, we are nowhere near that, but it is still too long and we still need to improve on that. So I'm really looking forward to reviewing these arrangements with the working party, and I'll be the officer that supports that work so that we can get a nice, streamlined, as far as possible approach in that everybody feels is workable. I think in order to make that working party a useful working party, I don't think it should be too big. It shouldn't be unmanageable so that we can't meet together. But I think it would be really useful to have a cross-section of all the different types of individual committee members we've got at the moment. So we've got the independent members, the borough councillors and the parish councillors, and it'd be really good to get everybody's view to feed into that party, and perhaps a chairman on board as well. So I haven't imposed numbers or restrictions. I'm hoping that this evening that we can have some nominations put forward and agree a reasonably sized working party to take forward what is an exciting opportunity. And I hope to be able to report back to the Standards Committee on the 30th of March with the revised arrangements. So we do have quite a tight timescale, which is why I might have appeared a little bit reserved on the media protocol, because I think to get that done for the March committee, the arrangements on their own is quite a substantial amount of work. But certainly once we've done that, we can then look at the media protocol as well. So over to, I don't know, Chairman.
Yes, I think probably our priority is to think in terms of the composition of that working party, and I certainly support what Melanie has said about having a wide representation from the 3 principal groups that we have here, but keeping the numbers small so that meetings can be convened at reasonably short notice and keep the momentum going. I think we've had an indication of one member on the independent team who would volunteer to be a member of that working party. That's Peter Moore. Can I ask the parish councillors if there is a volunteer from amongst yourselves who would like to take part in the working party?
Thank you, Chair. Just to say that I should not be standing as a parish councillor come May, so I'd take myself out of the process.
Chair, sorry, can we just clarify, are you predominantly wanting to do this during the work day?
I can be flexible. Actually, it was one of the questions I was going to ask once we got the committee appointed, whether the preference was for daytime or evening meetings. So I can be flexible around that.
Does that help?
I don't know if it helps, but this is a matter that the Standards Committee don't have delegated authority to determine, so it will be referred to full council at some point once we've had our March Standards Committee meeting. If approved, the arrangements then will need to go to full council. So just to make you aware before you volunteer, that given that an independent member isn't in attendance at full council, that if there are any questions around it, that it may be appropriate for you to respond as you're going to, whoever is nominated to work on this group.
What timing was that? Sorry, through the chair. What timing are you talking about? Full council. What's the timetable you're suggesting, Melanie?
It will be the first available council meeting after the 30th of March, subject to there being availability on the agenda.
Well, it must be disappointing to other members of the committee to have the councillor members. It isn't a question of not being enthused by the task. My two colleagues here have difficulty with daytime attendance, and I have to be very honest, Chair, that my commitments to the Audit Committee, the Economic Planning and Housing Committee, and a couple of others, and not introducing party politics, but it's my election year this year, and I don't think I therefore, in true honesty, could give it justice. I'm sorry, and I regret that I rule myself out. Yeah,
on your first point, though, I mean, the daytime meetings was mentioned, but as Melanie said, you know, that's an option. If it's going to be evenings, it'll be evenings.
Chairman, I find myself in a difficult position, but Councillor Putty may be the right decision because he is the Vice Chairman, but he has a vast experience of the old and current process, and you know, when I first started this, it's very difficult to understand the process. And if you're being asked to change or introduce it's not exactly a blank sheet of paper. Melanie's not going to say, here you are, write it from scratch. I'm sure she won't. But experience of the process could well help.
I think that's quite a valid point. I do wonder if this, for the purposes of the evening's meeting, we propose that Councillor Putty is put on the working party, obviously subject to his approval. If for any reason Councillor Putty is unable to fulfil that role, that we go back to borough councillors and say, is there anybody else who would be available to assist?
Chair, thanks. I was going to say that would fit quite well in the sense that I'm quite happy to do it, but my caveat is I could only attend evening meetings, so by all means put me down. But if Councillor Putty can be more flexible, then I'm quite happy to step down.
Fine, so that means in a couple of cases we have sort of a reserve, as it were. It's subject to how it works out, but we'll certainly approach Councillor Putty on that idea. Thanks for that, Chris. And Councillor Spillane, we'll go to you first of all, and then if that doesn't work, we'll come to Councillor Fryer. Okay, and you'll, yeah? Did you have a caveat there?
Will you be chairing it, Chairman? No. Will you be on it? Good. Thank you.
Can we elect the chairman straight away, Chairman? Can we elect the chairman now? I was just trying to say you've got the job anyway.
Happy to let the chair this evening, but it is a working party, so it's hopefully going to have different people with different responsibilities within that group. But happy to do that if necessary.
Two things, if I may, Chair. First of all, going back to numbers, and I think a point was very properly made in terms of new membership of this committee. And I think if you would allow, and if Councillor Tomlin would wish to, for him to attend the working party anyway, because it would give an opportunity for another councillor member to gain experience in that context, and I think that would be valuable for the committee moving forward. In terms of the voting of the chair, Councillor Putty has been nominated for the working party, isn't here to agree to be a member. I think he will, but he isn't then able to make a vote in relation to chair if that's usual for a working group to elect the chair, vice chair at their first meeting. And I would suggest that we stay with that.
Chairman, sorry to come back and make a meal of it. I propose you as chairman because I thought we were going to have one, with the chairman being you. If you're not chairman, then you've got two independent members. Not that it matters, two independent members, but you could. Then other side, you say, well, hey, there's two there. Why can we not have two? That's the only reason why I was saying that. You know, you're there as ex officio, if you like. Not really, but that sort of thing.
In a way, we've got 2, 2 and 2. 2 independents, 2 parish and 2 borough councillors. And it'll probably be dependent on availability and who turns up. So it's probably better to have that pool, rather than have too small a pool. I know, Peter, you're probably thinking in terms of having a really tight group, but since there is a shade of uncertainty about timing of meetings, perhaps at this stage we should just take all those nominations and leave them on the table and see how it pans out. Yeah.
Chair, can I say I agree with that? Yeah, I think it's a very good idea.
Yeah. Okay. Well, in that case, I think we have got to the end of our formal agenda. So I declare that this particular meeting closed.